and then we'll run through. Excellent. Okay, well, thank you all for coming. What we're going to do in this webinar is give a summary of Plenary 19, which I think some of you may have attended either in person or remotely. But within TAB, the Technical Advisory Board, we thought it would be good to try and give a wrap up of the plenary. So what we're going to do in this webinar is give an overview that highlights the key outcomes from the sessions. And we're structuring that by the Plenary Pathways, which is a way we cluster the different sessions that are available in the programme. And there's three of us who've put this content together, myself, Gretchen Green from NIST, and Minfang Wu from ARDC. Myself and Minfang will present this morning, and then in this evening session, it'll be myself and Gretchen. And RDA Plenary 19 was a fantastic hybrid event. So there was a very large and diverse international audience, both in Korea, in Seoul, but also online and the Hoover platform. And there was great support from the local organisers. You can see a lovely picture of Hillary and Sandra and others there, all smiling, and a lot of interest in the Korean culture as well. There was a fantastic opening, which I'm sad I didn't actually see in person, to see Bridget and Simon in their traditional costumes. So, as I mentioned, we're going to use the Plenary Pathways as a way to structure this webinar. There were 9 pathways overall, and we're going to address them in 2 groups. So first off, we'll cover the fair care and trust. There's 2 pathways there. The data infrastructure and environments, there's 3 pathways there, and the training and data stewardship. And then we'll have a pause for some discussion and a little break, and then we'll go through the remaining 4 pathways. And what we did in this plenary, this is the first time we did it, we asked every session organizer to give us a 1-slide summary. And in this, this diagram, you can see where we received those summaries, so the orange bars, and then the overall number of sessions. So we received just a little under half of the summaries per session, and that's what we've based the content of this webinar on. So not everything will be presented because we didn't manage ourselves to attend all of the sessions, and that's really why we want to call this out to you, because there may be sessions that we didn't get summaries for, that we aren't presenting, that there were useful observations that you had that you want to add into the discussion. You can see all the summary slides on the Google Drive, so by all means look at that as well. And this is how the content broke down across the different pathways. And I'd like to just give a huge call out to Ming, because she did the really hard work of indexing all of this for us and pulling together all the links to the slides that we received for the different pathways that helped us structure the summaries that we give. Now, some of those pathways had a lot of sessions, so the fair care and trust, and also the data infrastructure and environments in an international context, they were the largest kind of pathways with the most content. And just to flag other, there were only actually 4 sessions that picked other as a pathway, and they'd all actually picked one of the other pathways. So we present them in the main kind of thematic pathway rather than under other. I also wanted to flag that there were a lot of BOFs. There were BOFs in every single pathway. That shows us a lot of emerging practice still. And there were some pathways where there were quite a lot of BOFs, so 3 or more. So looking around fair implementation, the international data infrastructure, and also data life cycles. So these are areas where there's a lot of new emerging work as well. And there was one community of practice. This is a new concept within RDA. And I think it will be interesting to see how other communities of practice emerge as well. Now, one thing to flag about how the pathways were used, every session organizer could pick 1 or more pathways, and some of them chose multiple. And we've reported on them where it seemed most appropriate. So we looked at the summary slide, we picked out what was the key theme, and that's where we've presented them in this webinar. So when we do the index slides where you see what sessions were in each pathway, you'll sometimes see some things grayed out, and that means that either they're presented elsewhere or we didn't receive a summary. So just to give you an agenda for today, we're going to present a synthesis per pathway that pulls out the common themes. And we'll take probably about 5 minutes per pathway. And then, as I mentioned, we'll have a break after each kind of batch of pathways. And we would like you to be ready to ask questions or share your own observations. You can also do that in the collaborative notes as we go through, because we aren't going to be presenting on everything. So we'll cover the Fair Care Trust, the data infrastructure and the training pathways first, and then we'll have kind of 10 minutes or maybe more if we manage time-wise, and then we'll cover the final 3 pathways. So I'll begin with Fair Care and Trust. And as I said, these 2 pathways were very large. In the Principles pathway, there were 17 sessions. You can see in terms of the working groups, there were 3 working groups that we received the summaries for. And then in the interest groups, there's actually only 1 there that we received a summary for. Let me advance. Here we go. So there's 4 summaries overall that we're presenting here. The first one's around CURE, and they've produced a new output, 10 things for curating reproducible and fair research. And a lot of their discussion focused on how to adopt that output and promoting the output. In the Fair for Research software group, again, there was a new output there, which is, we've added links so you can follow these up. This group is going to be using, this is actually a working group. This is going to be using the interest group that's linked to this as a way to maintain that output, to think about how to embed those principles and to see whether new work needs to be developed that might spin off new working groups there. The Virtual Research Environments Working Group had a really interesting discussion. They were thinking about how FAIR applies in the context of VREs, and they did a gap analysis there. One conclusion they came to is that there aren't actually any standards for VREs and that they're quite far off the reference architecture. So there's a lot of work that needs to be developed to think about how we're standardizing VREs, but also how we use our VREs to enable and support FAIR. So what can be put in place to make sure that they're actually implementing those principles. And then the privacy implications of research datasets interest group was reactivated at the last plenary at P18. And they've been focusing a lot really on the scope of their work. So how do you redefine privacy in the context of research data? They're looking at developing a vocabulary of terms, expanding their FAQs, looking at sharing all of the good practice, and also linking up with related groups like the sensitive data interest group. The common themes that came out across these, they wanted to look at how to define or understand FAIR in different contexts, like in the context of software or VREs. And there was an understanding that FAIR applies to a lot more than research objects. So looking at the fairness of the services as well, like the VREs or repositories, and the role of those services in enabling FAIR, either by minting DOIs or assigning licenses, using vocabularies. So there was a lot of work on the importance of vocabularies and standards, naturally, and a lot of work to try and enhance definitions in different contexts. There was also an observation that different types of users require different metadata. So there's a real need to try and understand who you're working for when you're developing the different principles within RDA. And within these groups, there was a lot of promotion and endorsement of new outputs. And then, oh, sorry, I've missed. The second element of FAIR here was around the adoption, implementation and deployment. This is the second pathway. Again, there were quite a lot of sessions, 26 sessions overall. And I'll just skip through these index slides. You can go back and link and see the different groups if you're interested in those. But the summary we're going to give is actually only of 3 groups here, the ones that are highlighted in green, because the other summaries we received are presented in other pathways. Of these, the data policy standardization, they were looking at the quality and utility of the data availability statements. And they were planning a follow-up session about how those statements themselves can be improved. And because of this focus on FAIR, thinking about how those statements can be beyond human readable to also be machine readable.
Come faccio adesso mandartelo che non riesco?
I don't know if you can mute whoever's speaking there. The sharing code group, they were looking at the the need to share code alongside publications. And this was a BOF, so it was really just kind of specking out work. And their focus there was on engaging with researchers and also with publishers to advocate the need to share code. And they're hoping to pool guidelines and good practice, and then to start thinking about a group that can be set up. And the third BOF here, this was around data quality issues, and they were looking at how data quality applies in the context of FAIR and how you can identify the community's interests and needs to provide data quality information, but also to try and do that in a multidisciplinary context. So to make sure that we're able to share and understand that quality information across different research areas, because it's often quite kind of discipline specific. So within this implementation pathway, there was naturally a lot of use of use cases and stories to understand the practice that was going on and to test the work. And across those sessions, there was also a requirement to work not just in the disciplinary context or the national context, but to be able to compare work across those. So a need to try and find the commonalities across the work different people were doing. Again, these groups flagged differences in what different types of users need from their guidelines or their standards. And I think that's probably a cross-cutting theme across all of these pathways. And then in terms of the FAIR aspects, there was a focus on machine readability, but also the need to address other concepts like data quality. And as I mentioned, the advocacy to researchers was key, and we'll see that also come up in other pathways, the need to try and get research communities to the plenary more and engage with them better. So I'll hand over to Ming now, who's going to talk about the data infrastructure and environment pathway. And there's 3 pathways here, one focusing on institutional, one regional and disciplinary, and one international. So
thank you, Sarah. As Sarah said, there are 3 pathways under the theme data infrastructure and environment. So we have 9 sessions for institutional, 5, and 7, thank you, 7 for regional and disciplinary. Move on, please. And 17 sessions for the data infrastructure at the international scale. Move on, please.
Yeah.
So about 15 sessions provide a summary. 8 of them are included in other pathways. So here we present 7 of them, not covered anywhere else, any other pathways. The first, there is a working group from Global Open Research Commons Interest Group or Working Group. They updated on the interest group activities, and more importantly, they reflect on their working group ongoing activity, that is a typology construct for thinking about the commons space. They will publish this typology net this year. So if you have any opinions on that, you can join this group work. And for the physical sample and collections interest group, they launched the 23 things for physical samples. And also they developing proper and consistent citation for samples in a publication. For the ESIP and RDA Earth Space and Environment Science Interest Group, they continue mapping the landscape of Earth, space, and environment data infrastructure and a vocabulary surveys, and further refine the ESEC interest group categories. Next, please, Sarah. For the research data architecture in research institute interest group, the changed social and architecture challenges by bringing together the supercomputing environment with the institutional data management service and workflows. Yeah, they are considering so yeah, is that so that and so with that integration, they can enable the data reuse, retention, and disposable, and both for researchers and by others. And for the data research data space taxonomy both, and they explore the data space in the context of data governance and management, and also data exchange and sharing. They trying to find the overlap and the difference between that data commons that first group presented. And for the data management plan working group, this joint session all about data management plans, and then trying to make a data management plan machine readable, and there are adopters express readiness to try out this machine readable DMP. And there is another joint session. It's all about repositories. They discuss the challenges of cross-discipline data repositories, how to share the perceptions of data repository studies. Move on, please.
Yeah.
And here on the common themes under the data infrastructure. So a few sessions talk about the integration of data management with repository workflows, and also with internal external services, and build capability on top of that. There are also sessions about the functional integration between computing environment, the coding, and the data. And there are also guidelines and work on the data citation integration and harmonization, and about the interoperability exchange among repositories. And also we see the data commons, and also emerging concept of data space. All these above themes involves semantic integration, and also how to communicate those concepts and vocabularies to wide audience.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, actually, because a lot of that terminology is different in different geographic spaces. So I think that data space term is quite European, but it's meaning similar things that's probably going on elsewhere in the world. So our final pathway that we'll present before we break for some questions and discussion is the training, data stewardship, and DMPs. And here there were 11 sessions overall. We received kind of summaries of 5 of those. There's actually only 2 that we're presenting. Sorry, these should be grayed out. There's 2 that we're presenting, the interest group on data stewardship and the early career engagement, because the other 3 have been covered in previous pathways. So the data stewardship one, this group again is producing a lot of outputs. So they have data stewardship models and also training needs for data stewards, and they have a career track survey that's now live. So if you're working in this space, by all means, take that survey. They're also looking to develop business cases to think about how you're able to, enhance and make a case for those career progression. And then the interest group on early career and engagement wanted to spread the news about their mentoring program, but they found that participation was quite low at the plenary, possibly the timing or the fact it's hybrid, because this group was really about developing the peer network. They usually have like a face-to-face drink session to try and help people buddy up with others that can help them navigate the plenary, but also find the right contacts to help them advance their work. So I think that's one that maybe does work better face-to-face, and that's one of the questions they had. The common themes that came out in the training aspect were around the fact that training is really strongly needed for many data professionals, and that when we're thinking about a concept like data stewardship, it applies to many roles. So curators, data managers, librarians, we have lots of new professions that are emerging here. In terms of the researcher aspect, they found that mentoring was really important for researchers, but maybe we need to do more to try and draw researchers to the plenary. And they talked actually about links with other groups, maybe using the co-data schools as a way to try and help bring more researchers into RDA work. And again, within these groups, there were several outputs and surveys that were promoted, and quite a lot of discussion as well about where to take interest groups next. So lots of groups that were just enhancing their remit, trying to think about the next phase of work. So that's, and conscious we've kind of bombarded you with information in this first 25 minutes, but that's the first 6 pathways. So we're over halfway through. And what we wanted to understand is your observations. How did you find these pathways if you attended some of the fair or the data infrastructure work? Maybe which sessions were most illuminating for you? What had worked well? We flagged a lot of new outputs. Are the ones that you're quite keen to engage in? And the reason why, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit snuffly today. The reason why we set up these pathways is to try and connect related work. And one thing you might have observed if you attended some of the pathways is potential gaps in the current working groups and interest groups, or opportunities for them to coordinate more. You might have reflections there. And as I mentioned, we haven't presented on all the sessions because we only received summaries for just under half. So there may be things that came out of other interest groups or working groups or BOFs that you think draw on the common themes we've identified, or things that you think should be presented. So I'm going to open the floor for discussion for the next kind of 10 minutes or so, either for any questions. I've noticed that when you screen share, oh, I can actually get to the chat now. I don't know if somebody has asked any questions in chat. It doesn't look like it. But if people want to raise hands or speak out, maybe give observations on those pathways, that would be good to hear.
Sarah, there are some notes in the collaborative
notes.
Yeah.
Let me see. Oh, sorry. No, you're all going to see the collaborative notes, and I'll have to try and find my way back to the slides in a minute. But let's see what's in the notes. If there's questions here, or you can also speak out. Could we join up future plan sessions? Actually, one observation when we were discussing these slides, we were talking about the challenge for working groups and interest groups, not only to manage their own work, but to try and understand the breadth of what's going on in RDA, and to see other groups that are relevant to their remit. I know I'm involved in the GORC one, and there were 2 BOFs this time, one on the data spaces, one on kind of principles for commonses, and they're very similar to our work. And we've talked with each of those BOFs about ways that we can join up. I think it'd be good if we can try and identify those links and help people plan future joint sessions. I'll just skim through for other comments here. Low attendance at the early career one. How can the title be more inclusive about late career researcher? Yeah, I think sometimes the early career term can maybe put people off. Okay, don't see other notes. Anyone want to ask questions or make observations? Or if not, we can move on. You're all very silent this morning. Maybe you're still sleepy like me. Now, let me see how I can...
Sarah, I could say something, I suppose.
Yeah, of course, go ahead.
Well, the people are here, but I noticed someone made a comment about the pathways. So it's interesting that actually some people didn't really know of their existence, and we must take that on board. Also, while the TAB do this wonderful job, the Secretariat need to also help TAB to make their work even more elevated, and those are the groups. So no suggestion is a bad suggestion. This particular plenary for us was a very challenging and difficult, but really successful one, because it's a first hybrid experiment, yes. So it's also important to get feedback from people, even like things like that, didn't know plenary pathways existed, or why isn't there a pathway on? Anything would be really, really valuable. If not something that the tab would take up directly, definitely the Secretariat and the plenary coordinators would be helpful.
Definitely. It's interesting, actually, the pathways. I think we've had it 2 or 3 plenaries now, Hilary, and it is like, I mean, I guess it's quite a new concept, so people aren't always aware of the pathways, and I'm not sure people use them to kind of structure the sessions they attend, but it's one way of trying to group the related work, and I think that might help people find kind of similar work going on in other interest groups or working groups, because that's a challenge for all of us at the plenary to see other things that we should engage with. Andrew's correcting me. We've had pathways since Botswana, at least. That was definitely before Corona time. So maybe it's been like 5 or 6 RDAs we've had them. But like I said, some of those pathways are more filled with content than others. Like the FAIR one seems to come up, it's really heavy sessions, but some of the others have fewer, so maybe we need to rethink some of the pathways as well, or different structure. So any observations you have on the pathways, how they work or not, would be useful to us as well. Okay, and just more in the chat around that, agreeing about the pathways. It takes time to get your head around it, but it pays off. I think it's quite a useful way to structure things and to try and find relevant content. Okay, by all means, keep chatting in the chat as well. And what we'll do.
Andrew, sorry, Andrew has his hands up.
Okay, sorry, I can't see the hands. Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
Yep, sorry, Sarah. I guess I was just thinking about the Global Open Research Commons and those two BOFs that you mentioned. And thinking about, I guess it's the balance between informal coordination, which is what happened there. We knew that they were planning to do this, and we offered to present in their sessions and contribute to the conversation. So it's the balance between that sort of informal coordination and the role of the Technical Advisory Board. And I know that the TAB has played a role in the past, and I guess continues to play a role around looking at proposals for new working groups or interest groups and saying, this seems like it's something that's already being done over here. Maybe you should talk to them. I'm wondering if there's potentially a role for TAB in brokering that kind of coordination before we get to the working group, interest group stage. Brokering the coordination when things are at that very early BOF formative stage.
I think that could be useful. Because the BOFs,
do it, by the way, but it's at least an idea.
No, definitely. And I see we have other TAB members on here, so we can maybe pick that up in one of our next meetings. Think about how we can, better coordinate across potential new groups, and also maybe use the pathways as a useful structure for kind of classifying what's going on in RDA and trying to link things up better. Excellent. Okay. I'm conscious that when you're in a webinar like this, observations often come to you later. So by all means, make comments in the notes or in the chat. We will have another little discussion at the end, but I'll move us on now to the second set of pathways. And I'll hand over to Ming, who's going to talk to us about the data life cycles.
Thank you, Sarah. Data lifecycle versioning, provenance, citation, and reward, and had 14 sessions. And we will have 6 sessions included in this summary. So first, the sharing reward and credit sessions. The important action from that interest group is call to participate in the survey to identify perceptions and expectation of various research communities. regarding how open science activities are taken into consideration and reward. Link is there, so if you want to participate, survey. And the second, data versioning interest group. So this group actually converted from the data versioning working group. They continue working on the data versioning principles. They trying to apply those principles to user cases and create practical guidelines or called actionable recommendations. The data discovery paradigm interest group, they had a batch of lightning talks, introduce a range of methods for exploring user data thinking behavior and context. The lesson learned is that taking time to examine your user behavior can shed valuable light on what you have and what you are providing it. And also they discussed the group's future activities. And now have to both leveraging data community strengths and high performance computing opportunities. I think this probably covered before. They actually identify technical and social challenges in terms of integration of supercomputing resources, and also explore FAIR and what FAIR means to the high performance computing environments. And the both evaluation of research. So the issue they discussed is how to evaluate and consider research output. For example, a dataset as a part of a wider research evaluation framework. They exchanged different stakeholders' views on the matters. And also there is a document they trying to gather relevant stories and a link. Yeah, so if you have any stories, please participate. Yeah. And the science communication for research data interest group, I think this is a new interest group. They discussed the interest group chart and try to have a clear definition of, whose roles to play communication and to do what. And for these pathways, it has diverse topics, each focus on the different stage of data life cycle. For example, there are topics about the versioning, data discovery, and authentication in access services, and also talked about the reward and credit to individuals, also the evaluation of research in relation to open science at a larger scale. Both this reward and credit would be lead to career paths, contribute to career paths, and also talking about science communication. The next pathway is semantics, ontology, and standardization. We had 11 sessions. 4 of them provided a summary. Okay, so so there are 3 working groups. The first one, persistent identification of instrument working group. They updated the 2 outputs. One is PIT instant metadata schemas, and a white paper help to adopt and provide more explanation of that schema. And they also updated on the potential new adopters. And the second working group, National PIT Strategy Working Group, I think this is new working group. They collected 6 user cases of national PIT strategy. They continue to collect the user cases in next 6 months. Then third working group, research metadata schemas working group. Actually, this is in maintenance mode. And so they updated the two outputs from the group. One is the guideline, another is crosswork. And so this session is more about the crosswork output adoption and extension. So the lesson they learned is there are unanticipated take-up of groups output. And there is an interest group, sensitive data. I think this is new. They basically provide a forum for shared understanding of sensitive data. Moving forward, they will develop a glossary of terms for sensitive data. So session in these pathways more focused, and it's concentrated on interoperability and discoveries, or about schemas, crosswalk, glossary of terms and vocabularies, and also about identification. There are persistent identification at the high-level strategy level, and also applying that PIT to individual objects. Okay, discipline-focused data issues. This pathway had 9 sessions. I think it's, the 3 ones had provided summary, and we cover 2 here. The third one covered in other pathways. So first is the IGET community of practice. I think this is a new community of practice, or only session about the community of practice. They updated on the change of groups and the members. They also introduced their very successful 2nd annual meetings. And moving forward, they will studying the word-fair pollination use cases, and also extend engagement in East Europe, and also hope RDA can assist with the outreach to Asia and Oceania. The life science data infrastructure. So they showcased deploying the life science infrastructures at continental scales. These are continents they presented, and they asked participant feedback to help the group of what the activities and work to focus into the future.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ming. As I mentioned at the start, there is another pathway as well, but there were only 4 sessions that chose this, and they'd all actually selected another kind of thematic pathway. So we presented the summaries in that. So what I'll do now is just draw a couple of conclusions and then open it up to questions again. As I mentioned, there were quite a lot of BOFs this time. There were BOFs in every pathway. And some of the themes that came out of the BOFs were things like how we evaluate research, how it is that we're assessing the quality of research, thinking about career progression. There was a BOF around the dataset quality. I know that's a key priority in the EOS context. There's quite a lot of groups emerging around code sharing. We've already got some interest groups, working groups there, but there's new groups potentially setting up. There were also 2 BOFs around data commons and data spaces and the taxonomies or the principles for those. One's on AI readiness, the complexity of data citations, how we handle that, implementing lab notebooks, some around community building, and also fair workflows. And one of the questions we had here are these key topics for you too? Are these new areas of work? Is there potential for setting up interest groups and working groups there? And also because we're focusing on pathways, we're thinking about how these new topics that are emerging in RDA will either fit into the pathways, or maybe we need new pathways so that we can try and form these clusters of related activity. And I see Stephanie's put a comment in the chat that it'd be good to consider the granularity of the pathways to avoid having ones that have so many sessions and some are maybe too broad. So maybe there's another way we could think about structuring the pathways and identifying those common themes that are coming out around the RDA work. So a few conclusions that we drew when we were putting together the slides. As we noted at the start, there were some pathways, that had the most number of sessions, so things around the global infrastructure and environments, and also fair implementation. They were very large pathways. I think that aligns very well with RDA's objectives because, it is around global research infrastructures and trying to make sure we harmonize and align the different standards and principles we're using. There was only one community of practice around agriculture. I find it interesting. Obviously, that's set up around a disciplinary area, and I think that's quite natural because that's where communities of practice are. But many others in RDA come from the information professional background. It will be interesting to see what other communities of practice form, maybe around some of the thematic things in RDA as well. As I mentioned, there were BOFs in every pathway, so there's lots of emerging work and ideas. And I think we need to think carefully about how we align those with existing groups or how we connect up new areas of work, because there's such a range of interest groups and working groups in RDA. It's quite hard to keep abreast of all the activity. And that's a hard task for the actual group organizers as well, the chairs. So I think if we can use pathways or another structure to try and help point people to relevant work, that would be good. FAIR was a very cross-cutting theme. We had 2 pathways on FAIR, but FAIR even came up in lots of other pathways, things like the data lifecycle and some of the standards work. So it seems to be a kind of overarching kind of concept in a lot of RDA work. As one of the groups noted, adoption is really hard to predict. Sometimes it's very unanticipated. And I think that's a key thing for groups to pick up on. It's hard to know how to get your output out, how to get it to the right community. Who is it that's going to be interested in that? Trying to understand the end user that you're working for, because obviously your outputs need to be pitched quite well because those users have very different needs. And a lot of the groups noted that they wanted to join up or align and work with other groups. So I think there's a lot of overlap between different RDA groups. That's why we started with these pathways to try and help structure things. But there's been lots of attempts in RDA to try and classify or index groups or show connections. And I think we always need more work around that because it's quite hard to find all the relevant content or to see the overlap between groups. And one question we have to all of you is whether this pathway summary is useful, and potentially, is this something we could do at a plenary? Is there a way that we can try and harness those discussions that come out at coffee breaks where people say, oh, I saw this great session, it made me think of this other group and we should connect those people up? Is there a way we can kind of use the wisdom of the crowd to draw out those common threads in real time and try and present back to people all these links and make it easier for people to navigate all the content that's going on at RDA? Because there's always so many parallels that you can't see everything. So those were some of our kind of closing observations and questions. And we have the same kind of discussion slide to close here. Again, about these final set of 3 pathways. Any observations you have about the sessions that you saw in those? Again, what sessions did you find useful? Are there things we haven't presented on that also should be observed? Or maybe just general observations about the pathways and how we help you get the best from RDA's work. So we have, let me see, we've got about 15 minutes left in this hour webinar. So again, I'll open it up to questions. You can raise a hand. I don't know if I can see the hand, so maybe just unmute if you want to speak out, or if there's anything in the Google Notes, because I can't see that at the moment, Ming, by all means pick up on that.
Yeah, there are some in the chat.
Yeah. Yeah, some comments from Isabel about the pathways. Yeah, lots of sessions can be identified in several pathways. That's actually one of the challenges we had drawing together these slides, because some things had 2 or 3 pathways, so we were trying to decide which one to put them in.
Yeah, I think, thank you, Sarah, for the enormous work. I think that maybe we should have somebody as an observer or a leader, just for each pathway.
Yeah.
Yes, just to report on all these all these questions, because actually it's a huge work.
Yeah, and to be honest, this is the first time we've done it. This idea came out from Gretchen because they do a similar thing at a conference that she's involved in. And we did think at the start, can we assign a tab member per pathway? And those tab members go to all the different sessions in that pathway and then can give a summary. But it's quite difficult sometimes to get somebody to all the sessions because they have their own sessions to run, and it's not always easy following everything because some of the pathways are large as well. But that could be a way to try and draw out common threads, or maybe we get community volunteers to try and follow a pathway, and we could even try and do some crowdsourcing during the plenary to have observations per pathway. Yeah, Lisa Let's who's saying that's an excellent idea to have a rapporteur per pathway. That certainly would have helped us. Ming has very much been a star in pulling together the content for this webinar with doing the whole indexing. But if we want to do this again, that's something we could actually do in advance. Once the program's published, we could do the indexing, and then we know what it is we're watching in each session, because we've very much done it retrospectively. Summary of the aims of the sessions before the plenary. Bombar suggesting in chat. I think that could be a good way for people to know, which sessions are going to be relevant, because sometimes it's quite hard to know what things to go to. I must admit, I actually found the 1-slide summary per session also very useful. When I was going through kind of my sections to create the slides, I think that could be a useful thing that we just ask people to do at each plenary, because there are a lot of sessions you can't attend. And I know there's some I still want to go back and watch because I've seen some useful links from them. So those 1-slide summaries are also a good way to let people just quickly see what happened in different sessions. Christopher Brown suggesting get the session leads to produce a summary straight after their session. Yep. I think we maybe need more reminders, because it's a shame we couldn't present on everything. I'm sure there was a lot of good content in the sessions that we didn't get summaries for, and useful things we could have presented on here.
And Sarah,
yeah,
and Stephanie has a comment saying it would be good to consider the granularity of the pathways, to avoid having too many sessions in one pathway.
Yeah, I think the FAIR pathway is a challenging one. So the two that were, I'll maybe jump back to that early slide where I index. Oh, sorry, there'll be a lot of jumping here. We have these slides online as well, so you will be able to go through to get all the links. But I'll go to the intro one. Here we go. 1 slide back. Yeah, there are some pathways that have a lot of content, so we maybe need to somehow break up some of these fair, care and trust, because as I say, lots of things related to fair, even in other pathways. And again, the international data infra is quite a big pathway, so there might be other kind of sub themes when we're programming RDA or thinking about the pathways. There might be other ways to structure it. Yeah, so there's a little bit of discussion between Chris and Andrew. I don't know if either of you want to unmute. Christopher was saying share the summary slides at the plenary. Andrew saying that's what they did.
Sorry, Sarah, I think Christopher's idea was that you do it as soon as the session finishes, and then let me get my video back on. You do it as soon as the session finishes, and then you would share it in the final session, which is a great idea, and I applaud the ambition. But I'm struggling to think of a plenary where I had a spare hour or two to sit down and summarize the session while the plenary was running.
Yeah.
Yes, it would require extra work, I admit. But I was
Well,
saying
that's
running the session, I only did the template when I was asked to do it. But yeah, it would need some sort of commitment. But I thought if you did that, you could then summarize them. I don't know, like a morning session the next day, summarizing what people had missed, perhaps. So it would require extra work, I admit. But I think it's just a way of people being able to have visibility of some of the other themes and sessions, which I mean, I admit I miss because I'm sort of so focused on the groups I'm involved in. I don't really see what's going on in other groups.
Yeah, ideally we'd find a way to kind of do this in real time at the plenary rather than, you know, a month after. But I think some of the groups did actually ask within their session, they allocated 5 minutes or so to draft that summary. So they asked people during, you know, the session to write in the collaborative notes, what were the key takeaways? And then as a group, they developed that slide. So this could be a practice that we propose to groups so that the community at large is summarizing what is it that's really key from this session we had today. What do we want to report out? And if we do manage to get some stuff kind of happening at the time of the plenary, maybe we could, you know, get some kind of wrap up happening, you know, either 10 minutes at the start of each day, or it could even be on a board at the physical plenary or something on the online platform that shows the summaries or pulls out common threads, or it could be more of a crowdsource thing. When Gretchen first gave this idea, it reminded me of the way Cliff Lynch does a summary at IDCC. And every year it's really nice to hear somebody's observations about these are the hooks that I caught that kind of cross-cut the different sessions. And maybe if we try and get, you know, a handful of volunteers who either watch each pathway or can draw out some of those common threads, it's something we could present somehow at the time, because I think that helps people then find the relevant content they've missed and a way to then go and catch up, or even to start those discussions.
Yeah, so I agree with all of that, Sarah. Inspired by Christopher's desire to get no sleep at plenaries, you could actually take it one step further and say, look, part of the final 5 or 10 minutes of each session, as you say, is constructing the summary slides. But then you post the summary slides for that day's sessions at the end of each day. Yeah. Because then you have the opportunity, as I say, if you're not sleeping, to look at the summary slides and work out who you need to talk to the next day. Yeah. Doing it at the end of the plenary is good, but it would be even better if at the end of day one, you could see the summary for a session that you'd thought, oh yeah, I won't bother going to that. Realize, oh, that's really interesting. I should have been in that. I'm going to look for that person at morning tea and ask the question that I would have asked if I'd been there.
Yeah, exactly. I think the more we can get in real time, the better. Yeah,
exactly. Because then you're brokering the conversations in the event. Yeah,
exactly. And Volmar's picking up the kind of same point. It's like a pitch to nudge the people into watching the recordings or catching up with people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, it seems like you found this kind of summary by pathways useful. So I think it's something we should certainly invest more in through TAB to try and provide these summaries of what's happened at the plenary, what are the key outputs, how can people find the relevant content. And then if we do manage to do it more real time, you know, it could become part of the regular RDA structure. I think there's an onus on session organizers to present the summaries or to provide those summary slides. And then, you know, we can see how that's a useful resource to people or not, and then decide, you know, how to add it in as a regular thing. But yeah, this was a kind of first trial. So it's good to get your feedback on whether it works, whether the pathways are useful, ways that we can improve them. So by all means, add more into the shared notes around that too. Something to try in Gutenberg, maybe. more for Hillary and the Secretariat to think about.
Sarah, may I just say that for those who weren't registered to the plenary and didn't attend it, the recordings of all the sessions will be available from the 23rd of August from the programme on the RDA website. So so they'll be available then, and you can access them. I think these slides we're making available from the webinar, and from tomorrow, US close of business, the recordings of the webinar will be available. But I would also like to remind or tell the people on the call and those who watch the recording that the TAB is a completely volunteer. The Technical Advisory Board is a completely volunteer board, like many of our boards in RDA. And we're very grateful for the effort that TAB, but particularly you, Sarah, Ming, and Gretchen, who'll be doing the one this evening, I think, to help you in all this work. We've taken on board the comments, and we will get back to the chairs and the secretariat and see what we can do. But I think it was a really, really valuable output, a summary of what went on in the sessions. And there's so much content there. It was a great way of presenting it. So thank you very, very much.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thanks to all of you for attending as well. I think, and also to the session chairs for doing those, one slide summaries. I think that actually is a really useful output of the sessions. So certainly something we can pick up on more and see how we can do in future plenaries as well. Excellent. Okay, well, I think we've probably got through your questions. By all means, add more to the shared notes if there's other observations that come out, because we will review those and think about how we do this at other plenaries. But I like the idea of trying to get more of this content out sooner. It's more work on us all, but it helps us find the relevant content and the links. I know I've still got on my to-do list sessions that I missed that I want to watch. So good to know they'll be online soon as well. Excellent. Well, thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your days or evenings or whatever time it is in your place in the world. And see you all later. Thank you.